Welcome to Take a One Those Shebs. My guests today, Leah and Trizzy from Ticket to Anywhere podcast. During my discussion with Leah and Trizzy, I spoke to them about why they started their podcast and their intention and goal behind it. Last, I spoke to them about the future of podcasting and whether it would be a direct challenge to the traditional media outlets. Let's take a look. Leah, Trizzy, welcome to the show. Great to have you both on. Where in the world are you?
I am in Los Angeles proper, really close to the LAX airport, because I know a lot of travelers, they know what LAX is.
I'm in LA also, but I'm in the suburbs.
We're going to come on to your podcast, which is why I brought you on, and talk about the future of podcasting itself. But Trizzy, first tell me a little bit about yourself, and then Leah, if you explain a little bit about yourself as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm Trizzy. I'm one of the hosts of the Ticket to Anywhere podcast. And you can find me on Instagram at EXEAEX, which stands for Exercise, Eat, Explore. And that basically is a big definition of who I am. I just love to exercise, eat, explore, travel, adventure, and all that fun jazz.
I'm Leah, LA in flight on every single social platform. Trizzy and I have known each other for about 14, 15 years, actually. It's been a long time. Our freshman year of university, that's when we met. Yeah. So by trade, I'm an event manager and a podcast consultant. And then in my free time, I love to talk about travel, write about it in, more so social media captions when I can, not necessarily blog about it, but help others travel as cheaply as possible and just try to be as helpful and practical as possible. So, Trizzy and I, she came to me one day, she's like, let's start a travel podcast together. And I was like, this is perfect. We both travel very different ways. And so it was perfect for the premise of our podcast because you kind of get the two views and two opinions that we like to help people with every single episode.
I always ask my guests when they come on, how did you initially fall in love with traveling? So I guess I'll start with you, Leah, first, and they'll come on to you, Trizzy. So for you, where did the initial love first start?
Growing up, we actually have a great podcast episode on us growing up with travel. So growing up, my family traveled a lot domestically. We took a ton of road trips. And it was just kind of the standard, like everyone gets dragged on vacation. Well, I'm sorry, I feel like that's a privileged thing to say, but many of us get dragged on vacation when we're younger, right? And it's not all that fun. We either want to be with friends or we just don't want to be on long walks all day. But I think you miss out on that. When you're younger, you realize, oh shoot, I loved that when I was, when you're older, you realize, oh wow, that I was really blessed to have that. So for me, I thought, when was it? College, I started traveling more casually, more domestically, short weekend trips to Vegas where we'd stuff 14 people in a room. Like Trizzy knows about that. She was there. We'd do it together. And as I grew and evolved, the traveling evolved. I tout myself as more of like a backpacker turned flashpacker recently because I've stayed in more and more hotels than hostels lately. I was like, maybe my style's changing a bit. But I think the biggest turning point for me after all my 2-week, 3-week vacations from the corporate life was I went to Nicaragua end of 2014, New Year's 2015. And I brought a suitcase, which was the wrong thing to do. And it was their high season. Anywhere in, Latin American countries for New Year's, Christmas is big. And I was like, you know what? I don't really want to work on that trip. It was 9 days. I don't really want to work the corporate life anymore. I think I want to do something more and travel more with the rest of my life. So that trip was a big turning point for me. I stayed in corporate life for another year and then took off traveling the world after that. So that was 7 years ago.
Oh, amazing. Yeah. Before I come to you, Trizzy, you can evolve as time goes on. So you might have started as a backpacker. Then as time goes on, as you get older anyway, things change. Mm-hmm. So for you, Trizzy, what about yourself? How did you fall in love with traveling?
Man, I fell in love with traveling when I fell in love with my partner. They brought me on these trips and it was so nice to see everything in history books, in front of your face. I've said this before, usually when I go on these trips, I'm just low expectation now because that's the standard that I want to put myself in. So when I get there, I'm just blown away by every little tiny thing. And the first, I guess, what really set my love for travel was when I went to Chichen Itza in Cancun, Mexico, and I saw, the ruins there. And pyramids and ruins, for some reason, they have a special place in my heart. And then after that, I went to Japan, and that was when everything just settled. And that's when my love for travel just started brewing and happening. And it's funny because I've never solo traveled. Like, me and Leah are so different in that way. The closest I've been to a hostel is a capsule hotel in Japan and a postal in Thailand. So my traveling style is completely different, whereas Leah's solo and I'm always with my partner or with my family group traveling. Mm-hmm. And my budgets are usually from, sometimes I watch my budgets, but then sometimes I want to be like, yo, let's just ball out. Let's do this luxury thing. But
you get airport pickups.
Yeah, airport pickups, everything like that. But I do occasionally love like the public transportation, and then just really like diving into the culture, taking a tuk-tuk or riding a tricycle in the Philippines and things like that. And my love for travel just continuous thanks to Mexico and Japan.
Both got different styles of traveling, and that's good because it will mean, when I come on to you asking about your podcast now, it will mean you've got different views, and it will help when it comes to questioning it. So I want to ask you, before I go on to your podcast, actually, where are your origins from? So Trizzy, where's your background from?
I'm full Chinese, but I'm Chinese American, born and raised in Seattle. My parents, they're both Chinese as well, but they were born and raised in Vietnam.
Okay, and what about you, Leah?
I'm first generation Filipino American. So my parents both came from the Philippines in the 70s and settled in LA, and here we are.
The podcast itself, we'll come on to that now.
Hey there, it's Trizzy and Leah, your hosts for the Ticket to Anywhere podcast. We created this travel podcast for you, who's just as obsessed with exploring the globe as we are. We each travel a different way and even have different work schedules. But every episode, we aim to widen your worldview, inspire you to consider a destination near or far, or learn from others. With us, you can adventure from anywhere.
I brought on a guest last year, and she had one of the very first travel podcasts that was called the Travel Radio Podcast, and she's kept it going for about 6-7 years now. We talked about how there's a lot of podcasts that came along during the start of the pandemic, and some of them now have almost sort of folded, and there's not much of them going on, partly because things have opened up again, people are starting to travel again. But for you guys, when you started the podcast itself, what was your intention before you started, and what has been your goal going forward with it? Because I've noticed you do a bi-monthly, so you got 2 episodes each month. So just tell me how it was, the beginnings really, and where you are right now.
So the whole podcast was started because I was in a rut with my profession, and I do. I'm a video producer, so I do music videos and music video content. Basically, what I do for Ticket to Anywhere. And I was just like stuck in a place where I was just so unhappy, and all I was thinking about was just, when is my next vacation? And I also noticed on the side that a lot of my coworkers and colleagues, they do not take vacations. So I hear a lot at work when we weren't working remote that if I told my coworkers and colleagues that I'm going to Thailand, I'm going to Singapore, they're like, "You're going on vacation again?" And I told them, like, I have the vacation days and you do too. So that kind of just like started like a light bulb for me. And I was like, what can I do to balance out my sanity, And travel is one, but I can't travel 24/7. We wish we can. Eventually that will happen. But at that time I was like, okay, what can I do? I love talking to travel with my friends, and bingo, at that time I was listening to a lot of podcasts. Why not make a travel podcast? I knew I couldn't do it alone. So I hit up my good friend Leah, and here we are. And basically what we intended was not for the pandemic to happen.
Number one.
Number one. And we were just hoping, because we both are, full-time employees, and have a huge passion to travel. And we just wanted people to know that it's okay to take a break from the corporate world. And like, hopefully that goal still like stays on and lingers on. But that was where my headspace was at.
I think for the future of like where we want to go and why we started it, Shebs, is because, well, we love the fact that Trizzy and I both travel completely different ways, right? So we're like, this is a good way for people to kind of, for us to cover like low to mid budget travel, right? For practical people who are working 9 to 5 jobs. Of course.
So you have those both perspectives really, so that you can relay that to your audience.
Exactly. Yeah. And because Trizzy is the producer, she's the editor for the show. And then I can handle some of the business aspects of it sometimes, and some of the marketing as well. So it's nice that we have this creative balance to each other. Like where one leaves off, the other one picks up, and it's awesome. And I think for the future of us, we'd love to, and this falls in line with the chat, is, become a travel media company where we're the talent and we're also the creative and the producers. So, like I also host on the side. I MC for different types of panels, different types of events as well. And so the podcast is just another platform to be able to have as a creative outlet. But again, like we love helping people, and we run Ticket to Anywhere runs 3 types of episodes right now. We have community episodes where we ask people to submit their answers. We have destination focused episodes where we just take the time to talk about a destination. And then we have guest episodes where we bring them on and we interview them about a topic that may be important to the travel industry.
How many years have you done it for, actually?
We started, our first episode dropped January 2020. And
so this was actually before the pandemic.
Exactly.
Right before. Crazy.
Yeah, we weren't planning for the pandemic to happen. So we had already, before the pandemic happened, I think we had 3-4 episodes out. And then there was like silence for about a few months because we were like, what are we going to do? And that's when we started having guests on. And it was just so much fun because we got to, meet a lot of new travel, like-minded people.
How do you balance it out then? So how often would you like to get guests on, and how often do you do the other 2 aspects of it?
It depends on all the guest intakes that we receive. We do put it out there. If anybody wants to be a guest, they'll sign these forms. So it depends on the availability of them.
So you don't actually approach the guest. You actually ask the guest if they want to join the show itself or be a part of the guest. Is that correct?
Oh no, we do approach them, but with response times, it's kind of difficult to get people like live when we want them, right? So we have to like shift, and we usually have 2 to 3 topics, guests, recordings like on deck to be able to push out. As far as cadence, like, I mean, if you're looking for advice for anyone who wants to get into podcasting, it's like, this is my biggest piece of advice. I was like, just prepare, because the industry is like so new. Just be prepared for everything to shift at any moment and be flexible and agile with it. Because this cadence of these 3 different types of episodes, we didn't figure out until a few months ago. We're like, wait a second, let's shape this and let's give people 3 different types of content. This is cool, because the way we promote it is also it's also slightly different from every single episode we bring out. So while we may not have like a Black history or, like Black creators on the podcast for the month of February, we still bring them on throughout the year. It's not like, for us, it's like, we don't only celebrate Black creators and Black, travel enthusiasts during the month of Feb. Like we may call out to them on social media and whatnot, but it's, it's all dependent on scheduling. But I think the agility with being able, or the agility that you need to have to be like, okay, like when are we going to release these episodes? Oh, this one didn't sound that great. Let's take some more time to fix it up. Different things.
Of course, this is a podcast that you're on now, and I've been very fortunate. I must say, I started mine in 2020 as well, and I was not expecting it to sort of get to the level it has done, and I've been very fortunate in terms of guests. So, and I think it was like middle of last year, I had enough guests for the entire, until actually I was recorded all up until March 2022. So that was in June. Wow. And I just had an influx of people coming to me that wanted to be on the show. And I didn't actually have to approach a guest, which was because whenever you start a
awesome.
podcast, but whenever you start a podcast, you think to yourself, where am I going to get these guests?
Mm-hmm.
How am I going to keep the content going? I want to talk about this. I want this. I want this. And I always had a name for my podcast. And that's the thing, is this is what my initial goal for the podcast was, to give voices to people that didn't have the voices so it could have been anyone, but also, yes, similar to what you guys were trying to do, encourage people to travel, and especially from people, my background anyway. And it's important because a lot of people do travel from our background, of course they do, but for them to hear someone that was from their origin was really important. The traditional side of media and television, radio, podcast is actually going to challenge them. And I read maybe a couple of years ago, actually, that the industry itself now is going to be worth maybe 35 billion, which is a lot of money. And so I made sure anything that I did professionally. I put it out, whatever I put out, I made sure I put it out in a way that it gave me a chance. So when sponsors or whatever come along, I've given myself a chance. So for you guys, did you look that far ahead? Did you think this is going to be a business? And do you ever want to be in traditional media, or is this going to be your baby, I guess, going forward?
I consider podcasting to be traditional media these days. And if not, it's I've worked with clients who use their podcast as a lead magnet to sell other other services, other products, etc. So there's a lot of different ways a podcast can go. I think with monetization, etc., and all that, of course we didn't start it and said we're going to start a podcast because we're going to bring in millions of dollars off this podcast. We clearly had a love and a passion for the topic that we're talking about. Also, travel podcasts are a very small niche too. Whenever I tell everyone we have a travel one, they're like, oh, that's different. And I'm like, exactly. Because travel is very visual. It's on Instagram, it's on Pinterest, it's on YouTube, etc. But this is like a supplement to everything else, to all of the media that Trizzy and I both have out there for us individually and for the podcast. Our systems in place are set up to hopefully bring on sponsors and partnerships for the future. Obviously, any brands or people that we align with closely and whatnot. But that did take a while, and we didn't go into it with oh, this is going to rake in tons of money. That's just this is something for the future. We're focused on getting great content out there first and helping people first and foremost, and then we're working on the business side of it as we go.
In terms of the business side, it will come. You just have to be patient. And the more you put out there, next thing you know, you've got the numbers to show, again, this is what we've got. Trust me, it will be a time when people you have to refuse sponsors. You've had the podcast now for a couple of years. Has it given you work outside of the podcast itself?
Yeah, we had a fun one last September with Cirque du Soleil, and that's how I learned that my pronunciation of Cirque du Soleil is Cirque du Soleil. But basically, we ran a contest for 3 pairs, so 6 tickets total, 3 pairs of Cirque du Soleil tickets in Las Vegas, on the Las Vegas Strip. And other than that, I can't remember what we've spoken on other people's podcasts as well, like My Travel Podcast. And I know Leah has done a few of the Traveler's Blueprint as well.
Yeah, they do a lot of roundtables, which is great. I think for me, it's my lines blur very much so between my professional life, if you will, what brings me immediate revenue, which is my freelance gigs, versus my podcast, which is a hobby turning into a business, right? But that's at the start of March 2020. That's when I started turning into hosting and emceeing things, and I use the podcast as a portfolio, kind of. So for me, it's also a place to show off, and I know it is for Trizzy too, because like I said, she's our editor. For me, it's also a portfolio and show off, oh, look, this is what I do as well. So that helps me in my professional life, being look, I can MC, I can moderate, I can host. And it also speaks to my dual ability. I'm we produce this behind the scenes on our own. We don't bring in any outside people yet. We produce this and then we go on air and we're the talent as well. So I always sell that in my events. I'm listen, if you want someone to plan the whole event, I can do it. But if you also want someone to host the event, I can also do So when we talk about outside opportunities, yeah, that's one of the biggest ones. And I think even we're both going to a couple travel conferences coming up this spring, and it's interesting because there's like we said, there's not a ton of podcasters yet. So I'm like, ooh, is this our, feel cool in this medium?
The niche itself I guess, is very important in terms of what you talk about. If I was to ask you both, just explain your podcast in a sentence, what would you both say?
Should I say our slogan, or is that too obvious?
No. We love it. We parade it.
You can talk on that though, but I want to go a little bit deeper. If I were to say one sentence, we help and motivate those who are traveling on like a low to mid budget. We help them explore the world, literally every corner of the world, where it's at home or abroad.
Slogan basically covers everything. We're 2 voices, 2 views, and 2 ways to adventure anywhere. Like I said, me and Leah were way different travelers. So when you listen to our podcast or when you watch it on YouTube, because we do have it as a visual podcast as well, you'll get 2 different perspectives, and you'll feel it a lot when it's our duet episode, when it's just us talking. Destination focused episodes as well.
Mentioned they're very important. So you got a visual aspect of it as well. Does the audio get more of the listeners?
If I were to estimate, I'd say like 95% of our audience is audio.
For me, when I first started it, I was visual first, because my background has always been editing, filming, etc., photography. So I've always done it visual, and then I went on to the audio. So everything's on the audio platform itself. But I try and produce it myself as if it's like a television show. So all the intro, so I've got like the intro coming in, then I introduce the show, I do the voiceovers, and I bring you, then the guests will come on. In between, I'll have like the photos and stuff. So I try and make it as visual as like a chat show as possible. And then I'd say, right, okay, you can listen to the audio section of it. And I put a lot of effort into the visual side of it, you see. And so the YouTube self is done well and it's grown, but I've almost felt as I've neglected the audio side of it. Do you see, as in the YouTube side being a huge thing going forward? Because people, I guess YouTube is the number one platform, isn't it, in terms of people watching videos as well?
I definitely think the visual part, especially since we are travel, and Leah mentioned that travel is very visual. We never went into doing this podcast without having a visual. Like, we knew that visual is going to play a part as well as audio, because Shebs, I'm the female version of you. I am a videographer and photographer as well. So that is my first, and then the audio would be my second. The difference that you will see, I don't know if you've ever watched like High on Life podcast. They also have like a YouTube travel channel as well, plus their audio. They focused their visual on just the speakers, just recording the speakers talk. But with us, we kind of insert pieces of our trips. So a lot of people will understand, like if we were to talk about the Maldives and the villa, then it'll show like Maldives and the villa.
My plan is I want to film it with a crew, and then you're a bit like, I guess, like a TV show. And then you're there, I'm interviewing you, and it'll be put out as a podcast, so it won't have like the television budget. What's your goal then for the coming years?
First off, I want to backtrack a tiny bit, Shebs, because you brought up something important. I'm sure we all know that like YouTube is the biggest, one of the second biggest search engine on the planet, but they are hiring a head of podcasts at YouTube to expand that arm. So the fact that they're trying to invest money into people to like bring this to life, because they realize, visual podcasts are actually popular, so they're investing in that, which I think is really important. I think that's really telling. But for the vision, we'd love to get our equipment out there like you, Shebs, and interview people in real time. We haven't actually tried it yet, but we both filmed remotely on different beaches. I was in Hawaii and Trizzy was in California, and then she edited them together.
Oh, okay.
So it was difficult because mine was really windy. But I had two different audio sets, so Trizzy got to like mix and match that. But I think the big goal would be to become a big media company. Yeah, and we can provide everything. We have talent, we have editors, we have producers, like this, build a team around that.
Man, that would be so ideal. I know that Leah and I, we've been talking about a newsletter too. So I know baby steps are in the works right now. So newsletter, and I'm hoping to kind of create more YouTube content that's different from the podcast as well. Somewhat like a vlogging style, but travel vlogging. So if Leah was in Oahu, she'll send me all the clips and I'll try and like put together kind of like a day in the life of what she did as a local, because she spent 2 weeks
editing on TikTok over here. She's editing in Adobe.
So there's a lot of places we could branch out at. And I think because Leah and I both have such creative spirits too, despite how different we could be in travel, travel styles, we're pretty like phenomenal. Like once we hit that creative bulb together.
I think community first and foremost. Like we want to make ourselves and the brand approachable so that if anyone needs any type of advice on anything whatsoever. I had people throwing a lot of questions at me in Hawaii, different questions. Where'd you stay? What'd you think of this? Blah, blah, blah. And of course we always, both of us, I know this for a fact, we try to infuse as much like local recommendations as we can over maybe the more touristy or overpriced ones. We try not to judge anyone the way they travel. Everyone is very, very different, right? But we are about supporting like the locals wherever we go. But yeah, it's making a community around it, hoping that people share the information with each other, making us approachable and making a wealth of knowledge available to as many people as possible.
I go back to me wanting to be in location. The only person I know is doing that, and I think we're all mutual friends with her, is Christine Lazada. I've seen some of her podcasts where she's filming in location and she's got the mic up and stuff. So you could almost say she's almost ahead of the game in terms of that. You talk about media companies. So potentially, for example, I'm not saying this is going to happen, by the way, but if I had my podcast and you were doing your podcast and we wanted to do a media, potentially merging with different types of people could be a way, and then bringing it into one big platform, which is something I've thought about in the past. But whether that's going to be possible logistically, that's another thing. I guess nowadays, with how everything is hybrid and remote, there's possibilities for that. And you could then, well, again, if you're doing a podcast and I'm in, let's just say Jordan doing one and you're in so-and-so, having it in one big media corporation, which is within the podcast realm, or it doesn't even have to be podcast, you could then branch out. So you might have podcasters like your flagship show, then you have other shows in between. That's something that I've visualized thinking of with how fortunate we are with the platform that we have, such as YouTube, where I put it out and you guys put it out as well. That there's so much opportunity, I think, especially, I don't know whether you guys actually monetize on YouTube, because there's potentially you could make thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, potentially millions from it, you see. So have you guys even thought about maybe merging with others to make it bigger?
I don't think at this time. I think we're focused on kind of just growing the brand for now where it's at, and putting that useful content out there. I also think because we have a smaller audience on YouTube, I don't think we can monetize at this time either. I don't know, Trizzy, you might know more about that. No, we definitely
can't.
Girl, you could.
Yeah, we're working on that.
There. I know.
Yeah. But the thing is
you guys will get there. If I can get there, you guys can get there.
Yeah. And seeing from the different perspective of when you're talking about merging, when you see other industries, when they talk about merging, it's always to compete, And I feel like with the travel industry, if we ever get to that point when we merge, it will feel more like a community rather than competition. So that would be a lovely idea. But once we get to that level, let's go, Shebs.
I think this is the opportunity for someone to find an investor and then just go with it.
So Shebs, are you thinking like a podcast network? type, like focused on travel podcasts.
Yeah, 100%. That's what I think.
That would be super cool.
You think about the streaming side of things, where you've got other podcasts within those. So you've got Ticket to Anywhere, you've got, say, mine. Let's say I just mentioned Christine. You've got hers. It's all on one big platform, and you guys would make money from it, so on. So it's. I think there's a definitely a chance for something to, because essentially, if you've got a travel channel now, why not? Hey, and this is like on demand. You can watch it at any time, you see, and you could go worldwide with it. So at the minute, I think there's a travel channel here in the UK. There's a travel channel in the US, but I can't watch your travel channel because I'm not based in the US.
Yeah.
But with the streaming platform, you can. This is why I love, for example, the podcast community, where you could be anywhere. You can listen to my podcast from anywhere. You can watch my podcast from anywhere because it's on YouTube as well. So mine is monetized on YouTube. YouTube take a massive chunk of it.
Do they?
They take from the advertising revenue. They take probably 95% of it. I barely see.
Okay, I didn't know it was that big.
My show isn't big at the moment in terms of worldwide audience. Well, I mean, it does get worldwide, but we're not talking millions of views every single week. But for me to bring it onto a platform where it's unknown, it's a risk, isn't it?
It's interesting because I know there's a lot of thoughts in the industry surrounding, like, oh, if a show is solely on, say, a music platform, we won't mention any names, but a big music platform without an RSS feed, and it's just a show, is it still a podcast? And I'm like, oh, that's a good question, because industry is still changing, but the definition of a podcast is that it has an RSS feed. But it always is interesting when bigger shows like move on to one platform and they stay there. I'm like, well, they're so big they can do anything they want. But I don't know about anyone smaller than that. Like, what would happen? Like if you were to move off a big platform, Shebs, and then go to a lesser known one, it's like, what would happen? You'd
need people to fund it, really. And it's going to have to be millions, if I'm quite honest with you, before you see any sort of revenue from it. So for advertisers to really then pitch their work into it. So the only reason why I know a little bit about all this sort of stuff because of my work on radio, and it's very similar, but there's endless possibilities with podcasting.
I have another question for you, actually. Sorry, I'm like interviewing the interviewer. Go on. Do you feel, because you're such an awesome multi-hyphenate and you do so many things, like, you're a journalist, director, producer. Do you feel that your audiences for the rest of your work have helped? Like, what's the crossover of them being like part of your podcast audience as the ones listening? Do you think there's much crossover?
So I do have a lot of fans, and a lot of them watch the show. A lot of them will read all my stuff, and you do get those crossovers. And then it's the way I've built mine over time has been word of mouth, and I've hardly done any. And this thing is, I've hardly spent much money on it marketing wise. I don't know how. What sort of budget you guys have had, but to have been built on just word of mouth at the moment has been great. But what I'd like to do is have a budget set. So then anything that I've done on my writing side, like magazines and been on newspapers, etc., they've actually helped. And then what I try and always say to them is, if there's anything, always link my stuff so then people can find me and then go to those sites, you see. And that's the only way you can grow. And it's a very saturated industry, the media industry, and it's very cutthroat. If you thought about the niche and why it's so important to have that niche, because you are competing with so many people out there that you have to stand out, and it has to be something exceptional. Some of the guests I've had I've been very fortunate. Early on, I got some, I mean, I don't want to say big names because I see everyone as equal, but because they had 10, 15 years, they've been on television, had television shows, had books out, it actually helped. So like, I guess anyone starting, if you can get a big guest early on, the word of mouth goes, oh, he's actually quite a good guy, good show to go on. Do you feel as though you can branch out and then help the podcast itself?
But me as a writer, you don't want that. I'm more, that's why I do the videos.
I was never a writer myself, but if you put your mind to it, it's all about mindset, really. That's another thing, actually. If you have the right mindset for a podcast to be successful or anything, you could achieve anything. your bright light can show, and then trust me, if I can do it, anyone can do it.
There you go, Trizzy.
That's got the accent. That's why he has a lot of.
I've got the accent. Yeah.
I've always thought about doing maybe like a T2A blog as well, just to have our tips and tricks that we do talk about on audio as reading, because I know a lot of people like to read as well. Leah has a blog. You have a blog, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it's under construction. Like literally every website is under construction. We do have a website. It's tickettoanywhere.com, but it's pretty basic right now. But yeah, we'd like to make that a place for community in the future where we can have guest blogs on, or we can just obviously like turn our, YouTube and podcast descriptions into blog posts. Like, here are the 10 things you're going to learn about traveling Finland in November, right? That type of content. There's a lot of chatter right now if like travel blogs are still a thing in 2022. So, that's always like a curious, topic, especially in these days where everything is video, right? Every app, it wants you to stay and just stare at the video. But yeah, I mean, LA in flight is also a work in progress too.
And I know we've been on multiple social media platforms as well. Like we're trying to grow on Twitter, so not just Instagram, because right now Instagram seems to be our strongest media platform, but Twitter is very fun to be on. I love doing that. Pinterest, where I do a lot of my research when I'm going on a trip. So I was just like, why not do some Pinterest? Let's start pinning stuff. Well,
the socials are really important. If you're going to grow, they're going to play a massive part in any business, really, not just podcasts, in any business.
We like to think it's a good way for us to connect with people. Like that's how we've found most of our guests actually is through social media, which is great. And we find that that's where the immediate connection happens through a DM or through a response to a story, or asking the community questions, or inviting them for polls, etc. and whatnot. So yeah, we're in the process of ramping everything up.
It sounds really exciting. I can't wait. I love listening to your show. That's why I brought you guys on. So it's great to have you guys on talking about the podcast. So I just want to move it away, and I wish you more success on the podcast. I want to ask you a question that I've started to ask people. What's your guilty pleasure? It doesn't have to be traveling. Anything, any guilty pleasure that you have right now.
That's a good one. Oh, go to Trizzy first. Trizzy, you think about that.
Go on, Trizzy, you tell us.
All right, y'all gonna laugh at me, but I low-key love Ariana Grande songs.
Oh, my goodness. Wasn't expecting that. I was, no way.
Yeah.
What does it for you with Ariana Grande?
Her voice, her poppiness. I
like her.
I've tried to battle myself and say don't like her, but even like as she's grown as a person too, that's what I kind of like look into. Instead of her as an artist, I see her as a person, and she's just been really like powerful with being a woman and just standing up for herself, for her friends, her family, and just woman empowerment in general, through music and just through her own lifestyle. And but yeah, when I come across her songs during my workout, I just get so pumped, and I kind of just start dancing, and I'm like, I hope nobody sees it in my garage.
In my garage.
What about you, Leah?
Oh, I don't know. This is a hard one, because I think for me, when it comes to things I like, I don't really try to like hide it, to be honest. I'm just like, let yourself have it. I'm like really been into gold jewelry lately, and I'm like, just let yourself have it. Not that I am frivolous with my spending, but I like don't deny myself dessert either. Not that I eat a ton of dessert after every meal, but if like something sweet to cleanse the palate, I'm like, I'm going to do it. So for me, everything's just kind of part of life. It sounds so boring, but I'm like, oh, I'll let myself have the dessert, or I'll let myself like buy this gold jewelry. So to me, I'm like, it's just part of me.
Awesome. Well, it's great to have both, by the way. So can I just ask you one more question? So away from everything, travel-wise, work-wise, Trizzy, you mentioned you do a lot of workouts and stuff. So any other hobbies that you guys have that might intrigue our listeners?
One of my like special hobbies that I will never get rid of is playing basketball.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know if that's going to intrigue everybody.
I was going to say, did you play? Did you try and become a pro then, or was it?
Yeah, Shep. No, I did not. That's always been a dream of mine since I was little. And then I stopped playing basketball because I tried to pursue a dance career in Hollywood. And acting career and stuff like that. I could have been the next Aquafina. So,
oh wow!
If any Hollywood agents is listening to this, y'all need another Aquafina. I am here.
Well, you never know if that is a passion of yours. Why not? Hey, in the future.
We'll I told her, I was like, she could still try out for the WNBA. Come on now.
And I interviewed someone for my podcast, Loves to Travel, Drea Castro. She is.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, she's an actress, producer, director, film. Does a travel podcast.
She's out here in LA. Yeah, she's out here in LA.
So there's a possibility, Trizzy, that you could become exactly the same. It's connections as well, by the way.
Yeah.
It's just connecting. It's just having the right connection and just.
That would be hilarious. You guys will see me in the next Marvel movie.
What about you, Leah? Have you got any hobbies?
I think for me, they're like hobbies that keep stopping and restarting. But I do love to dance, like in particular hip hop or some contemporary type modern dance, and then salsa and bachata as well. So whenever I can, I try to. I was thinking about that. I'm like, I need to restart it this week. So dancing in general is a hobby I try to upkeep. Yeah,
we've come to the end of the podcast. It's flown by. Remind people wherever we can find you both.
So I'm Leah, LA in Flight on every single platform, very social. Would love to connect with you.
And I'm Trizzy. You can find me on Instagram at EXEAEX, Exercise, Eat, Explore. If you want to be inspired and encouraged to exercise, eat, and explore, I'm there for you because I'm all about that.
Keep in touch with us on social media at Ticket2 Anywhere Podcast. Remember to connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok. Never miss an episode by subscribing to Ticket2 Anywhere Podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Pocket Casts. And hit subscribe to follow our visual podcasts on YouTube to keep up to date on our channel.
Shebs, appreciate you for letting us be on here. Yes. And so nice talking to you, man. This is like a regular conversation of at a bar or something.
Thank you guys both for coming on and making it natural and feel as though I am having a drink with you at a bar. So thank you. And I will speak to you guys very soon.
All right. Thank you, Shebs. Take care.
That's it for Take a One Dose Shebs. Hope to see you all very soon. Until next time, bye for now.